There are people who live their lives like a song, a track played at full volume, full of feedback and heart that captures the entire feeling of a moment in time. When the song ends, the silence it leaves behind is deafening, but the melody lingers forever for those who were there to hear it. This is the story of a life that was New York City's anthem in the 1990s, a life lived with a laugh that echoed off tenement walls and a spirit that turned cracked pavement into a grand stage. To understand the story of Harold Hunter, you have to journey back to a New York that no longer exists, a city of grit and beautiful decay, of danger and boundless possibility. His life was a fast-forward mixtape, chronicling the journey of a boy from the projects who, through sheer force of personality, became a king of the streets, a movie star, and a global icon of a burgeoning subculture. It's a story of a meteoric rise that casts a long, dark shadow, a story of love, addiction, and the crushing weight of one's own legend. This is the chronological telling of that life, from its vibrant beginning to its tragic end, and the beautiful, enduring legacy that rose from its ashes. Harold Atkins Hunter made his entrance into the world on April 2, 1974, in New York City. He was raised alongside his brothers within the red brick confines of the Campos Plaza housing projects, situated on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. To understand the boy, you must first understand the world that cradled him. The New York of the 1970s and 80s was a city on its knees. It was a landscape of urban blight, a direct fallout from the near bankruptcy of the mid-70s, famously immortalized by the Daily News headline, "Ford to City, Drop Dead." The Lower East Side, or Loisaida, as its Puerto Rican residents called it, was the epicenter of this beautiful struggle. It was a neighborhood of tenement buildings with fire escapes zigzagging down their fronts, of bodegas blasting salsa music onto streets littered with broken glass. It was a place where the scent of roasting pork from a street cart mixed with the acrid smell of burning garbage. Landlords, unable to collect rent or pay taxes, often torch their own buildings for the insurance money, leaving behind vacant, rubble-strewn lots that neighborhood kids would definitely reclaim as playgrounds. This was not a landscape of hope, but one of survival. Yet, in this crucible of neglect, a vibrant, raw culture was being born. The city's decay was a blank canvas. Graffiti artists, or writers, turned subway cars into rolling masterpieces. In the Bronx, DJs were inventing hip-hop by looping break beats on twin turntables. Downtown punk rock was festering in grimy clubs like CBGB. This was the symphony of the streets that Harold grew up in, a world of incredible hardship, but also of defiant, explosive creativity. From his earliest days, Harold was a spark plug. His energy was boundless, his spirit infectious. He possessed a laugh that would become his sonic signature, a high-pitched, almost cartoonish cackle that was pure, unadulterated joy. It was a sound of life in a place that often felt overshadowed by decay. In the tight-knit community of Campos Plaza, he was a known character, a whirlwind of motion and noise. His brother Ronald saw early on that Harold had a special gift for connecting with people, a magnetic charisma that drew others to him. Around 1987, when Harold was 13, he discovered the object that would fundamentally alter the course of his life, a skateboard. In the context of the late 80s, skateboarding was not the polished mainstream Olympic sport it is today. It was an outlaw activity, an emblem of punk rock and suburban rebellion, largely associated with the sun-drenched emptiness of California's drained swimming pools. In the dense, vertical, and hostile environment of New York City, it was something else entirely. For a kid from the projects, a skateboard was a passport. It was a tool of liberation. It offered a feeling of flight, of gliding over the cracked sidewalks and asphalt that symbolized the roughness of his world. It transformed the city's oppressive architecture into a landscape of opportunity. A set of stairs wasn't an obstacle, it was a challenge. A marble ledge wasn't just part of a building, it was a surface to be slid across. Skateboarding gave Harold a way to interact with his city on his own terms, to reinterpret its meaning, and to carve out a space for himself within it. It was more than a hobby. It was the beginning of his self-definition. As the 1980s bled into the 1990s, Harold Hunter's reputation began to ripple out from the Lower East Side. He was no longer just a kid from the projects who skated. He was becoming a central nervous system for the entire downtown skate scene. His thrones were the granite benches of Washington Square Park and the hallowed brick banks under the Brooklyn Bridge. Washington Square Park in particular was his kingdom. In that pre-gentrification era, the park was a true melting pot of American subcultures. It was a daily open-air convention of skaters, bike messengers, punks, hustlers, drug dealers, NYU students, and aging hippies. It was a place with its own unwritten laws and social codes, and Harold navigated it with the effortless grace of a born politician. He held court, his laughter echoing across the asphalt, his presence a unifying force for the disparate groups of kids who found refuge there. The Brooklyn Banks was the scene's sacred cathedral, a sprawling, multi-leveled space of red-bricked, banked transitions beneath the rumbling Brooklyn Bridge. It was a notoriously difficult and intimidating spot to skate. Harold conquered it not with technical wizardry, but with inimitable style. His skating was a reflection of his personality, fluid, improvisational, and full of joy. It was less about the difficulty of the trick and more about the beauty of the execution. He skated like a jazz musician, with feeling, rhythm, and a deep connection to his instrument and his environment. What made Harold truly revolutionary, however, was his identity. In a subculture overwhelmingly dominated by white faces, Harold was a pioneer for Black and Latino kids. He wasn't overtly political about it. His method of breaking down racial barriers was simply to be so undeniably charismatic and inclusive that race became irrelevant in his presence. He formed a tight-knit, multiracial crew, a band of brothers united by their love for skating, hip-hop, and the chaotic energy of their city. This crew, which would eventually inspire the iconic brand Zoo York, became the embodiment of a new, uniquely East Coast street culture. Harold was their unofficial leader, their ambassador, their heart and soul. He was a king crowned not by birthright, but by the sheer force of his spirit. In 1994, two figures appeared in Washington Square Park who would irrevocably change Harold's life and the lives of his friends. They were the photographer Larry Clark, a man in his 50s known for his stark, controversial images of youth, and a precocious 19-year-old screenwriter named Harmony Korine. They were not just observing the scene. They were casting for a movie. They were looking for authenticity, for kids who embodied the raw, unfiltered reality of their lives. They didn't need to look far. Harold, with his booming laugh and magnetic energy, was a natural focal point. He, along with other key figures from the scene like Justin Pierce and Chloe Sevigny, were cast not as actors to play a part, but as people to simply be themselves in front of a camera. The resulting film, released in 1995, was Kids. It was less a movie and more a cultural grenade. The film's cinema verite style and its shocking, non-judgmental depiction of underage sex, drug use, and casual violence horrified and fascinated audiences in equal measure. Upon its premiere at the Cannes Film Festival, it sparked a firestorm of controversy. Critics debated whether it was a groundbreaking work of art that captured a hidden truth about a lost generation, or a morally bankrupt piece of exploitation cinema. This debate was not just academic, it had real-world consequences for its young, non-professional cast. They were paid a reported pittance, around $1,000, for their roles. They were then thrust into the international spotlight, forever associated with the nihilistic characters they portrayed. The central ethical question that still hangs over the film is one of power and responsibility. Did Larry Clark, the adult creator, have a duty of care for these vulnerable teenagers? Did the film, by glorifying their reckless lifestyle, inadvertently contribute to the tragic paths some of them would later take? For Harold, the film was a rocket ship. It took his local notoriety and blasted it into the stratosphere. Suddenly, the kid from Campos Plaza was being flown to movie premieres in Europe. He was recognized on streets all over the world. The doors to a new reality flew open. He began a successful modeling career, his unique look and authentic street credibility making him a perfect fit for urban fashion brands like Tommy Hilfiger and American Eagle. He was no longer just a skater, he was a recognizable face and an icon of cool. Leveraging this newfound fame, Harold and his friends, Rodney Smith and Eli Gesner, co-founded the skateboard company Zoo York. It was a landmark moment. Unlike the West Coast-dominated skate industry, Zoo York was unapologetically New York. Its aesthetic was a blend of graffiti, hip-hop, and the raw energy of the city streets. It was authentic because it was founded and run by the very people who lived the culture. Harold was its spiritual ambassador. He was on top of the world. But the rocket ship of fame has no instruction manual, and it was powered by volatile fuel. The same lifestyle that had made him a star, the partying, the charisma, the performance of being Harold Hunter, was now his full-time job, and the pressure was beginning to mount. The shadow of his on-screen persona was long, and it started to follow him everywhere. The years that followed the explosion of kids were a whirlwind of dizzying highs and creeping private lows. To the outside world, Harold was living the dream. He traveled constantly, was a fixture at the most exclusive parties, and was beloved by a vast and diverse network of people, from A-list celebrities to the skaters who still looked up to him in the park. His generosity during this time became the stuff of legend. There are dozens of stories, all variations on the same theme. Harold giving away a brand new pair of sneakers to a kid who admired them. Harold spending his last $20 to buy everyone food. Harold giving up his spot on a sponsored trip so another, younger skater could have the opportunity. He operated on an economy of joy, not capital. His currency was connected. As his friend Jessica Forsyth, who later co-founded his foundation, recalled, he had a unique gift for making every single person he spoke to feel like they were the center of the universe. But this public performance of boundless, radiant joy came at a terrible internal cost. He was trapped in the role of Harold Hunter. He confided in close friends that he felt a constant crushing pressure to be the life of the party, to be on at all times. He wasn't allowed a quiet moment or a bad day. His entrance into a room was a cue for the festivities to begin. It was an exhausting, unsustainable performance. This pressure fed directly into the dark spiral of his addiction. Cocaine, which had started as a recreational party favor, slowly morphed into a necessary tool for survival. It became the fuel he needed to maintain the high-energy persona the world demanded of him. It was a way to numb the deep-seated insecurities that gnawed at him. Despite his fame, he often felt like a fraud. He would tell friends he didn't believe he was a good enough skater to deserve his success, that he was just the loudest guy in the room. His friends and family saw the warning signs. They saw the light in his eyes flicker. They saw the joyous energy sometimes curdle into a desperate mania. They tried to intervene. His friend Billy Rohan spoke of the helplessness of watching the cycle repeat. They would get Harold to agree to get help. He would seem to be doing better for a while, and then the pressures of his life and the pull of the addiction would drag him back under. He described it as Harold being two people, the warm, funny, loving friend they all cherished, and the hollowed-out stranger who emerged when the drugs took hold. This was the central tragedy of Harold's life during his famous years. He was a man celebrated for his light, but he was burning himself out to produce it. The world loved the joy he projected, but was largely blind to the pain from which it sprang. He was the most connected man in New York, surrounded by hundreds of people who adored him, yet he was profoundly, desperately alone in his struggle. The winter of 2006 was cold in New York. For Harold, it was a season of quiet retreat. The constant touring and partying had slowed. At 31, the years of hard living were beginning to take their visible toll. He was spending more time in his apartment at Campos Plaza, the place where his journey had begun. In mid-February, friends began to worry. The constant stream of calls and pages from Harold had stopped. This was unusual for a man who was the social hub for so many. After several days of silence, his brother, Ronald Hunter, grew deeply concerned. On the afternoon of February 17, 2006, he went to Harold's apartment to check on him. What he found was a scene of devastating finality. Ronald discovered his brother's body on the floor of the apartment. The whirlwind of energy, the force of nature that was Harold Hunter, was still. The news, when it came, was a gut punch to the community. The official cause of death, as determined by the medical examiner, was a cocaine-induced heart attack. The heart that had been so big, so full of love for everyone else, had finally given out under the strain. The news spread not through official media channels at first, but through the underground network that Harold himself had helped build, a frantic chain of phone calls, text messages, and posts on nascent internet forums for skaters. For a generation of New Yorkers, and for the global community he had touched, it was unthinkable. It felt like the city's own heartbeat had stopped. The grief that followed Harold's death was immense and palpable. It was a profound loss, not just of a person, but of an era. He was a living link to a grittier, freer New York, and his passing felt like the final closing of that chapter. It was also a brutal wake-up call for the skateboarding community, forcing a painful reckoning with the dark side of the party culture that had long been romanticized. The tributes were immediate and heartfelt. Memorials were held. Murals were painted, and skateboarders across the world held sessions in his honor. The most significant gathering took place at the historic Ziegfeld Theater in Manhattan, a grand venue for a man who was king of the streets. Hundreds of people from every walk of life filled the theater. A-list actors, fashion designers, legendary artists, and the same kids, now grown men who had skated alongside him in Washington Square Park. They shared stories, they laughed through tears, and they celebrated the indelible mark he had left on them all. In the midst of this collective mourning, a powerful idea began to form. His closest friends, particularly Jessica Forsythe and Jefferson Pang, knew that the greatest tribute to Harold would be to continue his life's unofficial mission, looking out for the next generation. In 2007, they officially launched the Harold Hunter Foundation. The foundation's mission is to use skateboarding as a tool to empower at-risk youth. It is the formal embodiment of Harold's own informal life's work. The HHF provides kids from underserved communities with skateboards and safety gear, but its true work is much deeper. It offers mentorship, organizes events like the annual HHF Day that bring the community together, and creates a positive, supportive network for young people who might otherwise fall through the cracks. It provides a family. The Harold Hunter Foundation transformed his story. It ensured that he would be remembered not just as a cautionary tale, but as a perpetual source of inspiration. It harnessed the love that everyone felt for him and turned it into a sustainable, life-affirming force for good. Because of the foundation, Harold's spirit of generosity and inclusion continues to ripple through the city, touching the lives of kids who were not even born when he was alive. To measure the life of Harold Hunter in its 31 short years is to miss the point entirely. His life was not measured in duration, but in density, in the sheer amount of joy, chaos, and love he packed into his time on Earth. He was a living paradox, a broken kid from the projects who became a symbol of global cool, a leader who felt like an imposter, a man surrounded by adoring crowds who fought a lonely, eternal war. His story is inextricably linked to the story of New York City itself, a tale of raw, untamed energy being gradually sanitized and commercialized. He was the soul of a subculture that exploded into the mainstream, and he bore the triumphs and the scars of that transition. Yes, his life is a cautionary tale about the ravages of addiction and the crushing weight of a fame for which he was unprepared. But it is, more profoundly, a story about the enduring power of a human spirit to connect, to inspire, and to love. When he died, the community he had built with his own 2 hands and his enormous heart refused to let him go. They took the best parts of him, his generosity, his inclusivity, his love for the underdog, and built a legacy that ensures his light will never be extinguished. Harold Hunter, the king of the streets, may be gone, but his laugh still echoes in the work of his foundation, and his reign, in the hearts of those he inspired, is eternal. And that wraps up today's video. If this video resonated with you, please give it a like, leave a comment with your feedback, and subscribe to stay updated on upcoming videos. Appreciate you watching.